Yo, what's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Gifted Hoops podcast. We're here for episode 58, and today I'm joined here by a great content creator. I want to say this is a special episode for me because I'm a new one, and I watched a ton of his videos. Great communicator, Alex Hoops. What's good with you? Happy to have you here today on the pod.
What's up, man? Appreciate it. That's a great introduction. And I mean, you're killing it lately. Every time I get on Twitter, I'm like, I guarantee I'm going to see a Gifted Hoops tweet or something. He's going to be out here. Like, you work hard, man. I respect it. Seriously. I know how much work it takes. It's like putting out the amount of content that you put out. I mean, it's tough. I seriously respect it.
Yeah, it's very hard. I feel like a lot of people don't understand everything that goes into it because you have to watch the games, then you have to educate yourself on the teams, then you have to get your take out, and then you have to actually edit things, the lighting, the camera work, and then be consistent with all of this while working a full job for me personally. So it's a lot, but I love the sport. We love basketball, so that's why we do it, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Our podcast today is going to be covering the Oklahoma City Thunder. Alex has made a lot of good content around the NBA. I did not know Oklahoma City was your team, and I love that because I think they have easily been one of the most underrepresented teams in terms of people like accurately describing them. Because I feel like before the season started, a lot of people thought that OKC was going to just be like some cool team with Shea and all this, but they were the number one seed this season. What were your 2024 expectations on them?
So it's funny you say that because like I make the joke a lot of like I am the like least Thunder fan in the sense that like I don't have a lot of like homerism towards OKC. I mean, they're my favorite team. They're my favorite team because my mom's side of the family is from Oklahoma. So when they became a franchise, that's when I started rooting for them when they relocated from Seattle. But I like my attachment to the team. I'm a diehard Thunder fan, but I'm very realistic with how I view this team. Like, I'm not really the type of fan where I'm just going to kind of like make excuses for players that are like genuinely not very good. Like, just because they play for my team. Like, if you suck at basketball, not, that's very harsh phrasing. But if there are weaknesses in your game, I'm going to call them out. And like, I'm going to treat the team in a very realistic lens. So all of that is to say that like, with OKC heading into 2023-24, I was one of the Thunder fans that was like, guys, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Let's take a deep breath. They could, everything goes right, stars align. Maybe they're a top 4 seed. That's best case scenario. But it's a tough Western Conference. There's a lot of good teams. So if we look up at the end of the season and they're, the 6 seed, the 7 seed, they got to go through the play, and it's like, that's okay. And then, I'm someone who set your expectations low. You'll never be disappointed. End of the season, I look up, bam, they're, top 3 team in the NBA, number 1 in the West.
Yeah, man, I got to say, and this is cool hearing how you became a fan basically, because I was introduced to basketball in like 2013-ish. My brother went to Oklahoma for college. So I would travel down there and I would watch Oklahoma City play basketball. So the first few players who introduced me to the sport hardcore was probably Kevin Durant, but also Westbrook. Westbrook was like my guy, right? So then that brought me into the lens of, okay, this is kind of cool. And then I began actually watching basketball. And my first real game from the beginning to the end I watched was the Raptors take on Golden State, like way back. So I feel you in terms of not being like a homer fan. Like, I love Golden State, but obviously there's a lot of problems with the roster and truths that have to be said. And I feel like for Oklahoma City, they were such a hard team to rank for me because they went an entire season without like a very good front court, and they were still top 10 in defense. Like wow, like they spent a lot of their time during the regular season without their great big man in Chet, and they still were pretty, high up there. So I'm like, okay, Chet's going to be back. Shea's going to have another really good year. J-Dub look good. He will also be better. I'm like, this team can be good, but we obviously have to see it. And my God, do we see it? I mean, to finish the entire regular season, not just as the number one seed, the youngest number one seed, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think in history, yeah.
Yeah, but to also be top 5 in defense and offense, that moves me. Like, of anything else, for you to have that level of consistency with the different lineups and the trades and all this and that, for you to be that consistent throughout the season, OKC quickly gained a lot of respect from people. And Shai showed people, yeah, I'm very good at basketball. For years, I've been putting myself in that mix, but because they didn't win a whole lot of games and he missed a ton of games, people thought, okay, like he's cool, but how good is he really? I think this was a year where he really shushed all the haters or whatever and showed people how productive he is as a basketball player.
Absolutely. And I think for me, there were just the reason I was so reluctant to have super lofty expectations for OKC is you look at the amount of like question marks. Like for me, that's a good way to kind of start evaluating a team heading into a season is like, okay, how many things need to go right for this team for them to be the best version of themselves? If there's a lot of like situations where you're like, well, this needs to go right, this needs to go right, and this needs to go right. If there's a lot of those things, I wouldn't set your expectations too high. But if there's, a small 2 or 3 like minor things that need to go right, then yeah, that's probably going to be a pretty good team. And with OKC heading into this season, it's like, okay, Shai's amazing. Shai was the known variable, but how's J-Dub going to progress? How is Chet going to look coming off of this very unique injury that he had, which is a relatively unusual injury? It's not one we see in the NBA very, very much at all. How is he going to look? How is Josh Giddey going to fit into it all? Which ended up, we kind of saw how that played out. And then, J-Dub was the big one where everyone's like, this guy's going to be good, but how good is he going to be? And all of a sudden, J-Dub's like absolutely incredible. Everyone's like, this dude could be an all defensive caliber or all defense, all NBA caliber player years from now. And who knows, that might be sooner rather than later. And so I didn't know. I knew Aaron Wiggins was good. He's been one of my favorite role players. I didn't know he was going to be this good this year. Isaiah Joe, I knew he was going to be one of the best shooters in the NBA. I didn't think he was going to continue to be this good and be a part of OKC's most efficient lineups. So there were all these different question marks. But, sometimes the stars align. And even the things that didn't go very well for them, like Josh Giddey, well, it didn't matter because everything else went so resoundingly right for them that it was like, we can offset the negative impact that we have to deal with due to Josh Giddey's inefficiencies. And Josh Giddey might be fine in Chicago. I don't want to, sometimes I think we use Josh Giddey as like a easy excuse to pile on. There are other weaknesses that this team had. He was one of them. It got addressed. The other weaknesses, which I'm sure we're going to end up talking about, those also got addressed, which I think is a bigger part of the discussion. It was a lot of different parts that made the whole. It wasn't just one thing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Josh Giddey is a player that is very polarizing. I have the rare opinion that I think Josh is actually pretty productive at basketball. I just think that with OKC and the emergence of all of their pieces, it became a hard fit for his game with what OKC wants to do, with his weaknesses as a non-spacer by the defense, right? He's a great passer. He does all those things well, but his defense can be very bad in momentary situations. His offensive game can be crippling more than just having a decent shooter on the floor. So him moving on to Chicago, where he'll probably have the ball in his hands more, he'll probably look more effective. But in Oklahoma City, I don't think you would see that fully realized version of himself. I mean, shoot, even in this season, on the way to the playoffs, he had his strongest stretch of the season. So I give him a lot of, I would say, respect there, but I think the biggest area before we get into the players, obviously, that I have to give OKC a ton of credit for is their coaching staff. Mark D, again, I'll say this again. Last year, when people had literally zero expectations for anything, and they were still that competitive from game to game to game, where they would still lose games in the right way, right? I'll never forget. Shai didn't play a game and they played either Memphis or Boston. I forget who. And people were like, "Oh my God, OKC, they're gonna get blown out by a million," and they blew them out by like 50 points. Yeah, right. Yeah, yes. I'll never forget the game because I saw that and I'm like, no, like this team is well coached. They have confidence and they're not afraid of anybody. And you're telling me that this is the same team that was gonna have Chet, but because he got injured, he missed the entire season, which I think was a blessing in disguise for his overall development. So that's why he had such a strong rookie campaign. So for me, the coaching stands out a lot with this team.
Yeah, Mark Daigneault is. I'm really interested to see. I think this year, and really you can look at the past couple of years with OKC's rebuild since they brought in Mark. I'm interested to see, because right now OKC's offense is, I don't want to say it's simplistic. I think maybe bare bones is a better word, where like it's a lot of stuff is simple, but it's effective. Like, you know, they're running all these, like, we're going to have Isaiah Joe come up and set like a ghost screen for Shea and pop out. And that's going to, you know, open up space for Shea to drive, stuff like that. It's not the most complex stuff in the world, but it works because the talent is so good. And I'm looking at Mark Daigneault right now and seeing what OKC has to work with, especially next year, bring in Isaiah Hartenstein, who is a fantastic dribble handoff hub. We saw him do it in New York. It's something he's really good. Something I kind of have been a little bit critical of with OKC is they don't have the best screening in the world. Like, they run a lot of actions that involve screening, but in terms of setting hard, solid screens that are going to get a defender hung up and allow the ball handler to create an advantage or an off-ball cutter to create an advantage, they didn't have a ton of that. So Hartenstein, I'm excited because I think he's going to introduce a lot of that stuff that I felt OKC was lacking. And as that pertains to Mark Daigneault, I think he's going to be able to get really creative with the kind of stuff that they're running. And instead of just having this kind of bare bones, you know, simple but effective kind of offense, he can really get creative and try all sorts of new stuff to really open up everything for everybody on this roster. Because there's a lot of situations with OKC right now with their roster and the players on the roster where you can look at them and say, this player probably could be a lot better than they are if given an opportunity on a different roster. And instead of looking at that from OKC's perspective and being like, oh, they're holding a lot of players back, instead the coaching staff should be looking at that and saying, okay, we may not be able to get the absolute most out of this player, but we need to get out everything that we possibly can out of them. And I think that's going to be on the coaching staff to put those guys in the positions to succeed.
1,000,000%. And this isn't even on the show notes, but I want you to guess who my favorite player in terms of potential is on this roster. Not a star player.
Not a star player.
Not a star player, but he just knows how to play basketball the right way.
Is it Cason Wallace?
It's Cason Wallace, yes.
All right.
Like,
all right.
a lot of people don't talk about him, but for him to come in, have no attitude, play his minutes, play hard, pesky defense, and be a shooter for them, I just think that his development speaks so many volumes to their draft, like how they have the eye to get the right player in, and then the player development to get all these guys on the same page, right? Like, that speaks to the development of their entire coaching staff, which I just love. I think if you're going to be a good team, especially under this new era where you get punished for paying guys, you get punished for trying to keep players who you drafted, you have to have a good system. And to me, Mark D has really set that culture as, hey, we're going to work hard. Everyone is going to get their minutes, but I'm going to try to maximize everything. So there's going to be some nights where you might not play here or there. But if you have a skill set, we're going to look to push you forward and maximize you as best as you can. Even with Josh Giddey, right, where he was a clunky fit, he still had the respect to try to have him get burned in the playoffs, which I felt a little iffy about in the moment, but they stand by their players. Even trading Josh to another team where he can look better is a testament, I would say, to that. So I feel that a lot for this team. And again, I said coming in, like, I'm not sure how good OKC is going to be for 2024, but I know for a fact they're going to be a super young team. They're going to get downhill. Shea is a demon at getting to the paint. And Chet Holmgren is going to unlock so much for this team. I just felt it. And then seeing the rookie year he had, where if literally another 7'4" guy was not in the NBA, we'll be talking about Chet a lot more. But the role that he played for OKC, the shooting, the defense, I just want you to really speak on what it felt like seeing him play for the first time.
So it's funny because there are a few players, just because like I'm 26 years old, so there's not a ton of players that I've had the like benefit of being old enough to have watched like the start of their career all the way up to like them getting to the NBA. Just because like, you know, I couldn't, all these all-time greats that are playing now, it's not like when I was in elementary school, I was watching like, you know, LeBron James high school tape or anything like that. It's like, yeah, I was barely like conscious yet. But with Chet, he's a player who, since like social media has like popped off, like Instagram highlight reels of players have popped off, Chet's a player that I've been able to watch since he was in middle school. And, you know, like Ball is Life is posting about him and being like, this 7-foot 8th grader is like destroying his high school leagues right now, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Chet is a player that I've been lucky enough to watch for his entire career so far. And so for him to end up on the Thunder, which is my favorite team, it was like a very full circle moment for me. And so it was nice too, because I was pretty familiar with Chet's game. I knew what he could do in high school. I saw what he could do in college. So coming into his career in the NBA, it was like, you know, how much of all of this stuff that we've seen from his body of work so far, how much of this is going to translate to the NBA? How is he going to look in the NBA? Everyone has all these questions about 7-footers now. Literally every single 7-footer that's like under 200 pounds that comes into the NBA, they're always like, how's this dude going to hold up? This dude's going to get injured, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh my God, can he play the 5 really?
Is he going to be
really
able to stop
yeah.
Joel Embiid? Is he going to be able to defend Nikola Jokic? It's like, well, no one's defending those guys. Why are you singling out Chet here? So, and same goes for Wemby. You know, I post a Wemby video, I get 50,000 comments that are like, oh, well, how's he going to deal with so-and-so in the post? I'm like, what are we doing here? Come on. But with Chet, there were a lot of question marks that were fair. Those questions are always going to exist for guys like that. But for him to come in from day one and be immediate impact, like great defense, provides the rim protection that OKC needs. He's going to be able to stretch the floor, be a fantastic three-point shooter. I would like his volume to go up just a little bit, minor thing. I would like his handle to tighten up a little bit. Again, minor stuff, but this is the stuff that's really going to unlock the full potential for him. But overall, Chet's rookie year, I have zero complaints. I think he was fantastic. And for him to come in and not just play well, but for him to play well over 82 games. Chet, I believe, didn't miss a single game this year. That was huge. For him to play a full season was like the biggest thing for me. He could have shot 25% from 3. He could have shot, 40% from the field. He could have been a little bit underwhelming defender. I would have been like, that's fine. If he plays 82 games, that's what I want to see. The fact that he showed he could be healthy and be productive over the span of 82 games, I was like, he's going to be fine.
Absolutely. Like, I could not agree more with everything you said. For me, I saw clips, right? I saw the high school clips. I saw like he played against Victor. Wow, that's cool. But I didn't like really commit to watching him in college before that. So for me, all I had was the clips. I'm like, okay, let's see how he plays. And I watched him at the beginning of the year. And it's like, he is a master at the small things that he does not get enough credit for. Knowing that Chet is in the corner where he's a threat to shoot the ball, even if the ball is not in his hands, opens up so many actions, right? Shea, whenever he rejects the screen, right? Just Chet being there as a force makes them then think, okay, dang, should I help double in the paint? Or if I cheat off, he might shoot. Like, just making defenders have to think about his presence as a rookie speaks volumes, because most times it takes years for people to build up the, NBA reputation of that's a shooter.
Yep.
Right. We know that there's some, players who shoot 40%, but it's not on real volume. And then in the playoffs, it's like, yeah, you shot 40%, but we're still not going to guard you because we don't, that's not going to be Chet, right? So for him to come in with that mindset and then also being the defender that he is in terms of rim protection. I mean, we'll get to the playoffs. I don't want to like all the way fast forward there, but the shit he was doing in the playoffs defensively, it's like, wow, like they might have drafted a player that in 10 years can be the best player on the team. Like that's how good of a player I think Chet Holmgren is. And it's the perfect match in terms of having Shai and Chet. As Shai gets downhill, Chet can really create space in their two-man game. He gets a ton of actions where he has a smaller defender, on him. And thankfully, he said that this offseason he's working on punishing those exact situations because that'll translate. I love Chet and his fit for the team and what he'll do for the NBA as a whole, right? I think he'll grow, he'll get bigger, but his discipline defensively is something a lot of rookie players don't have.
Absolutely. And it's fun because you watch I kind of divide Chet's career up into like two parts prior to the NBA. Obviously, you got his high school stuff and his college stuff. And the player that Chet was in high school compared to the player that he was in college, very different players. The player in high school was more like what we expect from a first option kind of guy where like, yeah, you're going to put the ball in his hands. He's going to be, trying to take guys off the dribble, the primary scoring option kind of player. But then you skip to his time in college and what he was doing for Gonzaga, and it's a much different player. It was more of a part of, a cog in the machine. He was part of their scheme and very important to it, but he was not the focal point of the offense. It was a very, a word I use a lot to describe like unselfish offenses is egalitarian. Like everyone's involved, everyone's participating,
yep.
and everyone has a role to play. And it's not necessarily like, this guy is going to be the guy every single night. And what I saw from Chet is what was like, okay, the baseline for him is already super high because this is a guy who can operate in pretty much whatever scheme you put him in. He's going to be effective. There will be ways that he can contribute that are very, very obvious, and you don't need to change things up a drastic amount to get a lot out of him. But then you look at the stuff he was doing in high school, and that's where you can kind of be like, oh, there's way more to this player than just like solid baseline high-end starter. It's like all of a sudden you kind of have this guy who definitely has star potential. Like there's pretty much no doubt in my mind that Chet Holmgren's going to be an all-star at some point in his career. How many times he's going to be an all-star? I don't know. Could he be an all-NBA caliber player? I think so. Probably.
He could have been all defense this year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Completely agree. And I'm just excited for what the future looks like because again, the coaching staff has a lot of opportunities to experiment and try new things and get really creative. And I think Chet is definitely going to be one of the guys they look to get creative with.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll say with Chet that I really want to see him grow at is when they get the mismatch and they get underneath him. I feel like sometimes he has moments where he's not aggressively trying to get to spots. I think sometimes he can get shook and not like have the confidence to just go all the way. I feel like if he unlocks that dynamic, it just makes the Shai and Chet two-man game way more dangerous because more often than not, they're gonna switch because Shai is so fast. There's not really much time. There's few defenders who can fight over the screen and then get back out to Shai. And that's where Chet comes in big. I feel like if he's able to really develop a post-game mid-range even better, I think that makes their whole approach dangerous. And I 100% agree. The three-point volume, we got to see that go up because the more threes that he's taking, the more it's going to shift their whole offense. I mean, even seeing Chet be the trail three guy was tremendous for OKC because now it's like, okay, we have such a fast-paced play. If you have two bodies in the paint here in transition, okay, well, just trailing three. And just even mentally for teams to know that he's going to do that, it opens up so many opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just wanted to make sure I gave Chet his flowers, but I do want to get to the best player on this team to me still. Shai, like, it's just impossible what he does on a night-to-night basis. For a guard to be that efficient, where the majority of his shot volume is in the paint. For you to break the record held by KD for most 30-point games in a season, KD, like MVP 2012 KD, for him to break that and just consistently, like, I've seen players, right, where like, okay, wow, this guy averaged 38 points. He averaged, right, but normally it's like 30, 60, okay, 22, 28, 10, 50, right? Shea is 31, 31, 31, 31, 31, just consistently all the way through and through. And he did that for the entire season for the number one seed in the Western Conference. I just want to ask you, like, what are your thoughts about Shea and his overall growth and just how good of a player he is?
Yeah, it's one of those things where we got him and we were like, yeah, this guy is probably going to be a long-term part of the team for sure. But just how good is he going to be? Is he going to end up being the franchise player? Again, I always like talk about how I'm more of a realist when it comes to OKC. I really try to tailor my expectations. But for him to develop as rapidly and as much as he has, I didn't see it coming. And especially the types of shots that he takes, like he doesn't have a super non-demanding game. Like he has a very physically demanding game. The fact that I understand people have problems with like the free throw stuff. They talk about how, it's annoying him foul baiting, but for him to be able to do what he does over the course of an entire season, he missed 7 games this year. He played 75 games. For him to be as healthy as he was on the volume that he had and the physically demanding game that he has, like that amount of driving is not easy, regardless of if you take all the issue in the world with the foul baiting that you want, whatever. We can have that conversation, but you cannot deny the physical demand that much driving has on a basketball player. If you've played any amount of basketball, you look at what Shea's doing on the floor and you're like, how is he not exhausted? And one of the first things to go when you start to get fatigued is your shot. You can't get your legs under you. But for Shea, It doesn't matter. He's driving that much. He's definitely getting tired, but he's still able to hunt for that mid-range shot and make those shots look completely effortless. He has an insane amount of counters. He's so shifty. His body control when he's getting downhill to the basket and getting around the rim and trying to get those shots at the rim to fall. It doesn't make sense a lot of the times. And the biggest thing for me for Shea, and I have this conversation with a lot of people, the biggest question for me was, okay, we know how great he is. We know he's got the mid-range in his bag. We know he's got finishing at the rim in his bag. When the whistle tightens up in the postseason and teams know that you're not going to shoot a high volume of threes, what's that going to look like for Shea? Is he still going to be able to be as effective as a player as he was during the regular season in the playoffs? And guess what?
Yep.
We get to the playoffs, 30.2 points per game, 50% from the field, 43% from three. Guess what? It still didn't matter. It was like, it doesn't matter if I'm not going to shoot a ton of threes because I'm still going to make it look easy. I'm still going to put up 30 points. I'm still going to be the best scoring option on the team.
I'm still going to stop on a dime and get to my mid-range area if you're going to take away the paint and the three away from me. I could still get to that shot anytime I want.
I was waiting for the shot making to cool off and for him to understandably start getting tired. And guess what? It never happened. It just didn't happen.
No. I am such a fan of his game for everything that you said, right? For a player to go to the rim that many times, for you to have 700 plus attempts at the basket in a season, and for you to shoot,
that's ridiculous.
Like for you to have 700 plus, where you're lapping the next closest guard, right? The only other guard in the league that I think is even slightly comparable would be Ja Morant, and they attack the paint in 2 totally different ways, right? But for Shea to have that type of game where he does that, and then the mid range where he's able to stop on a dime off the screen quickly, right? And for him to just play this unorthodox game where it's like, yeah, I'm not too fast until I am. Like, to just go quick burst. Like, it reminds me of Harden so much in terms of like the quick first step and then pause, right? Like, he does that and he's building on a lot of those habits. And the free throw stuff, I want to talk about that. I got to be honest, right? I've gone through 2 phases of basketball education, right? The first phase, I'm sitting there watching the games like, damn, he just shooting whatever, and they're calling foul and this and that. I didn't like that stuff, right? But then the second phase is like, wait a minute. If you're having an off shooting night and you know that you can test a defense's discipline, getting to the free throw line does a lot of things. One, it gives you more time to breathe. It's a slight pause from the game. You're putting pressure on the good elite defensive players to making them have to not play in the game as much, which opens up so many other opportunities for your team. We see it all the time. We literally saw it for the Mavericks when Derek Lively was in foul trouble, how their defense wasn't the same, right? And then you also get free points off it. It makes sense. So to me, the balance was, okay, yes, he does grip sometimes. He does. But at the same time, when you have 700 attempts at the basket, at some point, something's got to give. He's going to get free throws. And then to see him answer the call when he was tested in the playoffs as well, to your point, showed you like this isn't a fluke. This isn't just some crazy one-off season he had. He's just like that. He's a very good basketball player. And also, the other part about Shai that we haven't talked about, because I'm not sure where you fall in line with this all the way, but I think the other impressive part about Shai is normally a guard with that profile who does so much offensively is like a drastic negative on the other end. For right. Like, I would say for most guards, it's like, okay, they're great offensive players. John Morant, Trae Young, phenomenal offensive players. But because there's so much of a burden offensively, and also because of their build, too, their defense is just bad. And I think Shai has had moments where he's had very positive defense. Overall, I think he's like a neutral defender. But for him to have that motor on both ends, to at least be capable, speaks to just how good of a player he is.
Yeah, the defense is a really interesting discussion for Shai, because I think there are different ways you can look at it. And another good example is people talk about Donovan Mitchell's defense. There are a lot of people that are very critical of Donovan Mitchell's defense, understandably so. There is plenty of stuff to criticize. But you look at the role that Donovan Mitchell plays for the Cavs, and it's turnover generation. His responsibility is to gamble. And sometimes it doesn't work. But guess what? You have Evan Mobley, you have Jarrett Allen, you have Isaac Okoro, you have guys that can cover for him. His job is turnover generation. And you look at Shai, it's a similar situation. There are minutia that you can have problems with about Shai's defense. Off-ball stuff, he can get caught sleeping every now and then. Sometimes he can get blown by. I understand that. But his responsibility is to gamble, and it's to generate turnovers. And that's really kind of the name of the game for OKC's defense as a whole. But Shai's job specifically, it's like, yeah, he's not defending he's not at the point of attack. It's Dort. He's not, J-Dub is going to be guarding these shot creating wings. Chet's going to be the one who's responsible for a large amount of the off-ball defense and help defense that's going to be played. That's not Shai's job. So yes, you can have these criticisms with his defense. I'm okay with that. I'm here for that, and I understand. But in the context of OKC's defense, if the question is he a elite defender? I would probably say no. But is he elite at what OKC asks him to do? The answer is yes.
And I think that's the perfect way to put it. Like, I don't like to go too far with Shai on defense either way, because you'll have some people say he's this elite two-way player who does everything right. And then you have some who say, well, he's a liability. I like to think that the answer is roughly in the middle, but he has a lot of moments where he understands where to be. And to me, that's all that matters. If you are a guard who has that offensive impact, understanding the concepts of team defense and where to be and what your role is and getting to the spots. I don't think you have to be some guy who has 3 blocks a game, you're all defense. I'm not asking you to be Drew Holiday. I'm asking you to not be Isaiah Thomas on defense. Respect to Isaiah Thomas, he was a hooper, but we understand what that was, right? So Shai, to have that mode, and again, like, I can't speak enough to see the way he was being hounded in the first round. A lot of people forget that they played, you know, an injured team in the first round, fine, but the defense they were playing on him, Herb Jones is very special, and I feel like Shai was like really managing the game while still finding ways to impact the game. To me, that is what screams a MVP player or like a very good player. What are you doing when you're 2 for 12 from the field? How else are you impacting the game when your shots are not falling? And Shai's biggest area of growth, which I still think needs to be his primary area, is getting better as a playmaker, right? Understanding where the skip passes are at sometimes, right? Because there's moments where sometimes he might not always have the right read. That happens. But for him to have everything else and still be this young speaks to how dominant he can really become, honestly.
Yeah, I completely agree. One last thing I do want to say about Shai's defense that he does deserve a ton of credit for that doesn't get talked about enough is he is probably one of the best rim protecting guards in the NBA, just in terms of like disrupting shots around the basket. That is something he does very, very well that kind of seems to fly under the radar. I just wanted to throw that out there because it doesn't get talked about enough. But his playmaking, I agree. This is kind of the area where we're going to see what still is there to be unlocked, because I don't think we've seen the best version of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander yet. But the areas of growth, is it going to be his 3-point volume? Do we see that take an uptick? You know, how much is he starting to look to pass more than scoring, and how does he start leveraging that scoring ability into creating for others? I'm interested to see. I think one of the reasons his passing doesn't shine a whole lot is because of kind of that simplicity that I talked about with their offense earlier. It's a question of like, is his playmaking predictable because of the simplicity of OKC's offense, or is it predictable just because that's his limitation as a passer? So that's kind of what I'm waiting to see, is like, as OKC's offense develops and they establish more of an identity of who they are as an offense and start to get a little bit more creative and try out new things, does that open up more passing opportunities for Shai, where he's like, oh, you know, this wasn't here before. All of a sudden I can punish like this expected rotation that a defense normally makes. Does he start to become conscious of that as they get a little bit more creative? Because Gabi actually just said it in the chat, which I completely agree with. Shai only passes to Chet on the pop. Like, that's probably the pass that Shai makes more than any other pass. If you go watch his passing
100%,
highlight,
100%, yeah.
Screener, go screen. I'm behind the back pass to the pop, and it looks cool and it works. A lot of the time it works, but I want to see him get a little bit more creative. And I think it's entirely possible that's it's not unrealistic for that to be an expected development of his. I think it's very much an attainable trait for his game.
Yeah, I think it's very doable, and especially with how he played in the playoffs, because again, I saw some games where it came down to crunch time. I believe this is either game 6 or game 5. I forget which game it was, but I'm literally seeing Shai take over the game, and his decision-making process was there, where he was making the right passes. Now, sometimes the shooters weren't making the shots, but again, how I view it is, if you're playmaking to make the right read, even if the shot isn't falling, you made the right read. And
Correct.
Shai showed glimpses that, okay, I understand how to put this apart. I might not be the best at it yet, but I can do a lot of things with my scoring to make up for that and still make the right read. So I think that growth is a place for him that's going to be there. And this kind of takes me to the playoffs, but also the offseason, right? Because I think a huge part of that growth is who Shai is playing with, right? Obviously, if you have Josh Giddey off the ball, there's going to be moments where sometimes Shai isn't going to think to really pass over there because that's the shot that the defense wants to invite. I think if you replace that with a guy like Caruso, who, you somehow got away with highway robbery.
Yeah.
No picks involved whatsoever. We'll speak on that in a minute, but just seeing what that could do to shift the series like the Maverick series is crazy. But I want to first begin with your thoughts on the Mavs series. I think for me, that was one of the most slept on series in the playoffs to me, because a lot of the games kind of got out of hand at times, but in real time watching it, it's like, wow, like this OKC team, like their flaws, which I was pointing out during the season, really showed up in the worst times. The rebounding was a huge part of why they lost to me. I got to be honest. The offensive rebounding and even like the double big lineup with, I believe, Jalen Williams, it just could not get the ball. And it's like they played good defense on this entire possession. But a big part of closing out possessions defensively is getting the rebound. So I want to get your thoughts on that whole series.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, a lot of people were optimistic about OKC in that series, and again, I'm a Thunder realist, and I was like, guys, this Mavs team is really freaking good. Like, I was at post-trade deadline, I was one of the people who was looking at the Mavs. I was like, this team could go to the finals. Like, this is a really, really, really good basketball team. But I think this is a series where you're going to look back 5 years from now, and people will look back, Thunder fans will look back on this series, and they're going to be like, this series was necessary for their growth. They needed to go through this series to learn what was next for them and learn, okay, like, are these weaknesses as serious of weaknesses as we thought? And then there was some stuff that was almost out of their control when you look at this series. Like, they were helping off of Derek Jones Jr., who not a three-point shooter. They were helping off of PJ Washington, who I understand PJ Washington kind of has this reputation as like the 3-and-D guy, but the actual the reality of his three-point shooting isn't as good as the idea of his three-point shooting. So they were understandably helping off of these guys that, like, yeah, in the playoffs, you need to find something to take away. You need to find somebody to help off of so you can provide extra attention to this other thing. That's just how defense works. And they were doing the right thing. Like, yeah, you help off of Derek Jones Jr. in the corner and you live with it. You help off of PJ Washington in the corner or Josh Green in the corner, and you just got to. I
kind of want to challenge a little bit what you're saying. Just a little bit, right? I agree 100%, but I felt like, and I was saying this in this, I was getting so livid, right? We're sitting in here every day watching basketball, watching the games, right? I was literally reviewing the film for every game. What made me so annoyed with OKC is they treated him like he was Rudy Gobert shooting the three. But what annoyed me the most about it is invite the above the break pull up three more than the wide open corner three. We saw Boston do it and he looked like a completely different player. Now, granted, PJ did shoot like 48% on 8 threes a game. You're going to lose. I'm sorry. If he's going to give you 27, 20 in back-to-back games, you're going to lose. I just felt like they were too loose with how they were so willing to give up the corner three. That's my only thing.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. That was an adjustment where I was like, this is one of the things with Mark Daigneault that I'm like, okay,
right.
You know, I'm a Thunder realist. I like Mark Daigneault, but I would like to see a little bit more flexibility. And not that, like, okay, here's the problem. You start showing more on the corners and not helping as much. Do you end up just giving too much space for Luka and Kyrie to work with? That's like, okay, try it, see how it goes. And then if it starts working, all of a sudden you've kind of figured something out that now the other team has to solve. And yeah, I didn't necessarily have an issue with who we were helping off of. It was the fact that when it stopped working, we didn't really try anything new. Some of that was personnel. Some of that was personnel related, where it's like, you know, it took too long for Josh Giddey to stop seeing significant minutes. It took too long for other guys to start getting, more run. And I don't think OKC needed to lose that series. I don't think they needed to lose that series in 6 like they did. It was 6 games, correct? Yeah. But ultimately, I think there was enough to learn from that series where you can find good things to move forward with. Even though, I mean, if I have the choice between lose this series but learn a lot for the future or make it to the Western Conference Finals, I'd probably take making it to the Western Conference Finals. But
Right.
you gotta learn from your mistakes, and that's how teams grow.
Yeah, I feel like a part of the series that changed things as well. I can agree with people who say that it wasn't the defense as to why they lost. I think that's fair.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because PJ did shoot out of his mind. Like, I do hear that. I just don't like it when teams kind of play defense like the 2021 Jazz, where it's like, we're just going to let these guys shoot threes in the corner all the time. Because at a certain point, if you are a NBA player with the same shot quality over and over in the same place for a whole series, eventually you'll catch fire. At least that's how I feel about it, right? But the offense is something that kind of mattered. And I feel like my biggest problem with the offense, as you said, I think it took him way too long to just say, Josh, you're on the bench. You can't, like, I felt like the way that the Mavericks were just loading up in the paint to where they were trying to take away the paint and take away the three and just inviting the mid-range area, I felt like it gave OKC a lot of problems. I felt like sometimes Chet was not aggressive enough to try to find his shot on the switch. Like, Chet, I love you. Don't shoot like 8 shots in the game. Like, they're giving you good shot quality. You have to go and take that. It felt like Shea had to really be a lot more aggressive with his own shot, because even J-Dub at times wasn't, aggressively getting downhill with confidence, wasn't shooting the three with the same confidence we saw all regular season. I feel like those were the habits that kind of got them undone in the series. Yeah,
and I'm a big proponent of playoff experience. I think, time and time again, it's something that shows up enough to where talking about playoff experience is an important part of the discussion. And I know a lot of people heading into this series, and not just for OKC, it goes for other teams as well. People are like, oh, playoff experience doesn't matter. If you're a good team, you're a good team. But playoff experience does matter.
Yeah, it does.
And if you've never been in that environment before where the pressure is at its highest and the lights are the brightest, like, yeah, there is a psychological aspect there. And to act like there isn't is just, in my opinion, ignorant. Like, that is a real thing. Playoff atmospheres are real things. And when you're under that much pressure and you've got the ball in your hands and you're like, your head is full of the questions of like, should I shoot it? Should I drive? Do I do this? Do I do that? It's like, yeah, you gotta do a lot in a small amount of time. You got to make a ton of decisions in a small amount of time. And if you haven't been in that environment before, that's very tough to do. And I think we saw the timidness of some of these guys being in that situation for the first time. And I understand. Did it frustrate me? Yeah. Did it frustrate me when Chet would pass up an open three? Yeah. Did it frustrate me when Aaron Wiggins would pass up an open three? Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I was definitely getting frustrated. But at the same time, I understand. And part of it is some of that is on the coaching staff of like, okay, we recognize that these guys are a little nervous right now. We recognize that they're hesitant to shoot the three. If that's the case, then we need to figure out a way to generate points that allows these guys to establish some confidence. And that didn't happen, which was a big part of the series. Like OKC's offense, which was top 5 half-court offense in the NBA during the regular season. It's like, this is a good offense, but in these situations, you have to be ready to make adjustments and alter your game plan if guys aren't confident.
Yeah, and this kind of takes me to this player, which I kind of feel like this player, and again, I'm not trying to pile up all the way on them, but I think they could have really swung the series if they were able to be their self during the regular season. J-Dub is a player that I think is very good. I want to be clear about this, right? Like, I think J-Dub had one of the most impressive post All-Star break rookie campaigns I've seen, where he was one of the most efficient players in the league. And then he followed up this year with just being a ridiculous, like at one point he was shooting 60% just flat every night on like good enough volume, right? With being a pretty bulky overall defender, right? Like, I think he's going to be very, very good. I think in this series, a lot of it came down to Chet and J-Dub simply not being hungry enough for shots, but more importantly, the shots that the defense doesn't want them to take. It kind of felt like they settled for shots that they can make. Sure, we saw them make those shots in the regular season. I'm not going to say they can't make them, but just putting pressure on the defense at a higher level. I think J-Dub is going to matter so much in that, because to me, he's the other ball handler on this team, not named Shea, who can operate in, I would say, two-man games with Chet, right? Who can do other things on the ball, especially in the non-Shea minutes. I think he's a big guy who matters in that, even though they do run more off ball, everyone eats, stuff. But that's how important he is to me. And I think that his growth as a player is really going to rise the ceiling for OKC.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't think he's far from where he needs to be to truly unlock everything. I think we'll probably see it this season. We're probably going to see a much more aggressive version of him, and I'm very excited for that. But yeah, definitely in that series, and it's a little bit frustrating. It's again a situation where it makes me frustrated, but I also understand. But I think the first round series version of J-Dub compared to the second round series version of J-Dub, those look like two completely different players. Yeah. He had so much confidence. Two different players, yeah. He was so confident. He was hunting his shot. He looked great. I was like, sweet, we're gonna roll right into the second round. And if he keeps this up, I mean, I'm really excited for what OKC is gonna be able to do. And again, it's one of those things where it's hard for me not to look at and be like, this is a mentality thing. Because when you see a player is capable of something on a night in, night out basis, it's really hard to sit there and be like, oh, well, maybe this is just who they are. It's like, no, we know who J-Dub is. We saw it for the whole season. We saw it in the first round. He just needs to be able to bring that regardless of who's in front of him and regardless of the situation. And that's something that I'm not really worried about it long term. It's like one of those things where it's like, it is what it is. You got to move on from it. You can't dwell on man, he sucked that series. It's like, yeah, but ultimately it's probably going to be okay.
And as I said before, I'm not the type of guy to blame an entire series on one player. There's a lot of areas where they all could have been better. And again, Chet and J-Dub, compared from the first round compared to the second round, they look like massively different players, because Shea was not the same offensive player he was in the first round. But that was fine because Chet and J-Dub were aggressive. They were looking for their shots. They were, converting a lot of their looks. In the second round, it felt like a lot of the three-point shooting for OKC kind of fell off, and the self-creation from J-Dub and Chet also fell off. So it was way more Shea reliant in the second round. But as you said, they showed that they have the ability to do it. At that point, it's just a matter of getting more experience and getting more confidence in yourself. And I think for your first time in the playoffs to do that and have a chance to go to the Western Conference Finals, that means something. And they played a team where the number one creators were Luka and Kyrie. I don't care the hell, whatever you want to say. Man. That is tough. I'm sorry, but the amount of tough shots, I was watching it, I would say maybe two or 3 days ago, I rewatched it. And it's seeing the amount of tough shots, it was there's no way Luka saw that skip pass. There's no way he just made this contested moving three, and he's not even all the way healthy. Seeing that made me feel like that's what you need, though. You face those battles in the playoffs and you become okay, we understand how to pace ourselves better and how to pick our spots. That comes with the player development. So I'm excited for what that means. But that does take us to my biggest X factor in the series. Beyond did threes fall or not, it was the rebounding. I'm sorry. If you go back to game 6, seeing it play out in that way where Shea's hitting tough shot after tough shot after tough shot, and the Mavericks are just getting second chance opportunities off those late rebounds was critical. And I feel like for you to add Hartenstein, the biggest reason why the value is there for him as an offseason ad is because there's moments where he can play next to Chet, sure, but the screening actions and also his effort on the glass fits the team a lot better to me, right? Even having Alex as a guy who, okay, the defense can't all the way cheat off of him as if he's Ben Simmons or Josh Giddey. There's some level of respect there. And then defensively, how that impacts it. Because if you have more elite defensive players on the floor, you can get more deflections and more skills and get out and transition more, which is OKC's game. So I think those two additions are going to shift a lot for OKC's coaching staff, as you noted earlier.
Yeah. And I'm not the biggest fan of, like, a very common thing that a lot of NBA fans will do is, it is frustrating to see a team not get rebounds. But I think sometimes it is, like, by default, like a gut reaction for people to blame rebounds. And in a lot of cases, people will be blaming the lack of rebounding. And in reality, the real problem is something else. But with OKC in that series, it was I was trying in my head to be like, okay, well, maybe the rebounding is actually not that bad. I was trying to do all the mental gymnastics of like,
yeah,
oh, okay, well, it's actually not a big deal that they're not getting rebounds. And like, I couldn't do it. Like, you have to end possessions. You have to end possessions. If you give the other team more scoring opportunities, it doesn't matter the defense that you're playing because you're not stopping the possession. And it was so frustrating to see that on a nightly basis. And also, you can put it onto the other side of the floor. You need to get offensive rebounds. Games aren't always won in the offensive rebounding column, but sometimes they are. And in the playoffs, when you're talking about series that are only 4, 5, 6, 7, X amount of games, it's like
where a couple possessions swing the entire series. I can give you a prime example, by the way, right? The Bucks versus the Nets was a prime example. A lot of people said this Nets team is not a good defensive team, but ironically, they played good defense versus the Bucks. The problem is those Jrue Holiday late rebounds, those Pat Connaughton late rebounds that edged them out. That's where they hurt them. When the game is close, that's where the offensive rebounds can really seal the deal.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because something that I think really helped the Mavericks in this series, and it's something I talked about in a Derek Lively video that I made in like the first 2 months of the season last year. And then I talked about it in a video after the series. Something that really worked for the Mavericks was Derek Lively getting offensive rebounds and spraying it out to shooters on the perimeter.
Yes.
And it's like, dude, getting a rebound and getting a putback for 2 points, okay, whatever. Maybe you live with that because it's 2 points. Getting
a three off the rebound team is crazy. Yeah.
It's infuriating to watch because it's like, you could have ended the possession 0 points, but instead you let them get the offensive rebound and they got 3 points. That's a 3-point swing. And that's just in playoff basketball. It's unacceptable. You can't let that happen.
Yeah.
At the amount that it did happen in that series.
I mean, shoot, I think the final play of game 6, I think they missed. I think there was a rebound. The ball wound up in PJ's hands in the corner, and then Shea fouled him on the 3.
Yep.
That's the series.
Spot on, man. You're right. That play. and then listen, like
I'm
running
sorry.
through my head right now. It makes me so frustrated.
Yeah. And like, that's one thing, but the thing that really made me mad about this, and again, I love Mark D. He's a good coach. For Mark D to know he had one timeout left, for him to challenge that when he fouls so clearly, it's like you realize if they say no, the game is, because at that point it's 1 second left in the game. So it's like burning the challenge there screws you if it doesn't go your way. And I'm like, okay, it's over now. Like tough.
Yeah. It is what it is, though. It's like they addressed the concern getting Hartenstein. I mean, it's funny. I actually pulled up some stats while you were talking, and like 98th percentile offensive rebounding rate, 87th percentile defensive rebounding rate. Like, he's immediately going to come in for that reason alone. OKC's going to be significantly better just having that much of a rebounding presence on the floor. Yeah,
he's good. Like, I've always loved him because he's felt like a Swiss Army knife in terms of like, he can pass. Like, having connective passers as bigs is like my love language. I love seeing big men passers that just understand how to move the ball quick and they set hard screens. Having that versatility can open up a lot of things, especially now in the non-Chet minutes. You can have him out there too. Like, there's just different ways to use him. And the same thing goes for Alex as a connective passer. He can do that too. That just adds a lot more dynamics to your entire team. really on both ends.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that about Caruso, because I think an underrated part of his game is the fact that, like, yeah, he's not going to be having a ton of on-ball reps, but he is fully capable of like running the pick and roll. Like he can hit guys on the roll and send up lobs, and that's something that I think OKC doesn't really have right now is a good lob passer, at least one that can capitalize on advantages and get downhill and kind of just put those up in the air around the rim for a guy like Chet to throw down. So I think that's going to help a ton, just having a little bit of extra passing. Like, that's going to open up a lot. And again, I think we can kind of talk about Cason Wallace here. I think down the road, maybe the hope is that Cason Wallace can kind of develop into more of that backup point guard that's like doing a lot of passing with your second unit and trying to generate, even though it's more simplistic, just kind of, you know, spread pick and roll kind of offense. Like that stuff for a bench unit's going to do a lot.
I need people to understand the reason why Cason Wallace is like my favorite player on this team is just because of how similar he reminds me really of one of my other favorite players, Jrue Holiday, in the sense that he doesn't really say much. He does his job, but the fact that he can play defense, he can shoot the ball, and the passing can be there. If he develops into that, that's a very terrifying backup guard rotation that you have at that point. I love that for OKC. So I hope he's able to really take that step because he's just such a high IQ player to me.
Yeah, and the motor speaks for itself. The seriousness that he plays with, like the game very much speaks for itself. Like everything is there. The infrastructure for him as a player is already so robust. It's like, dude, you don't have very far to go until you're just like one of the I mean, he already is probably one of the most valuable players off the bench for any team in the NBA right now. So the fact that that was year one for him, there's no telling how much more there is to be extracted. Do I think he's going to be like, you know, I don't see him being like second option kind of material. Right. I mean, maybe, who knows? But realistically, it's like, yeah, you're getting a high-end starter backup kind of guard who is going to be, you know, this is a 15-year pro right here, easily. And I'm happy too. And I'm happy that you said that. This isn't in the show notes, but I do have to address that. Moves like these are so important because with the new CBA, like with everything going on, you have to draft players who can be better than what their rookie contracts say they are, right? A prime example, when the Nuggets won the title, Christian Braun being able to come in for his spot minutes and swing possessions mattered, and he was not making that much money, right? Keon Ellis, another guy for the Kings, who just mid-season took over with his defense and helped evolve their defense, right? Cason Wallace is another example of a guy who got drafted there, and now he can just build up in their system and not have to be like a guy that they have to trade for and then give up way more assets for. You have it already in the pipeline. That's why he's so intriguing to me, because a guy like that can literally swing a series. I've seen it time and time again. And it's awesome too when you look at Isaiah Hartenstein's contract. I actually kind of talked about this a little bit in a recent video. Y'all already lead with that, by the way. That his contract is crazy. Yeah, the fact that it's structured in a way to where, yeah, he's making a good amount of money, but it's only like 17 or 18% of the cap, something like that. It's very, very low relative to the overall cap. And the team option, right? 30 years a team option. And the way it's structured, by the end of his contract, they're going to be due to pay a lot of the rookies, like rookie max extensions. So it's like, yeah, Isaiah Hartenstein's going to go off the books, and they're just going to sign all their rookies that they've got waiting on scale contracts right now. It's like perfect. They're set up so perfect. It's ridiculous. Yeah. Like they are so prepared for the new CBA. And then on top of it, and I do want to say this, okay? I am one of the people, and I will stand on this. I understand it wouldn't have guaranteed that they won this year. I get it. But I was one of the people saying, listen, $18 million with picks, and you can get Lloyd Markkanen on this team, because they literally had the expiring contract of Davis Bertans. I was literally 18. I remember, because every day I was looking at it like, come on, OKC, like you're number one, the rebounding, the shooting, and one of the best off-ball players in the association with Shea and Chet. I'm like, oh, please
Now they couldn't get it done, obviously, because if you're making deals with Danny Ainge, you have to trade the car, the house, the girl, the fan. Everything has to go. So that's probably why it didn't get done. But I was really yearning for that. I truly was, Alex.
Yeah, and I'm always going to look at that situation and be like, what could have been? But I do think there is some level of the Jazz were never going to trade Lowry unless it was for Lowry. Excuse me. I know I pronounce it differently every time I say it.
Yes, same.
I know the Jazz were in a situation of like, unless you give us the right to your firstborn child, we're not trading him. So
exactly. I said the same thing. I said, and by the way, sidebar, I'm gonna have a quick Warriors cope session. By the way, the fact that my team tried to act like they were interested in Lowry Marketing and then offered Moses Moody with some protected picks, a guy that they play Anthony Lamb and Corey Joseph over, like it. I was losing it myself, but yeah, like I definitely hear you on that because OKC is in a position where they're making the right moves. They're not rushing themselves. They're taking their time. And I think a lot of smart teams need to do that because sometimes your growth comes from within. Sometimes you don't have to add the name. We've seen many players chase the name and not the fit over and over and over. The only reason why Lowry made sense is because he wasn't a name guy to me. He was this guy's game perfectly could translate in this overall situation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. But I would say overall with our large comprehensive thing, we talked about the playoff, we talked about the 2024 season, we talked about Shea, talked about J-Dub, we talked about a lot on Cason Wallace. Love that man. That's dope. For 2025, with that full 24 season under the belt, what are the Thunder's expectations for you?
I think they have to make the Western Conference Finals. Like, I think if you don't make the Western Conference Finals at minimum, you kind of look at this season as you wasted a little bit of time. But I mean, they're at the point now where it's like you're playing for a championship. You're not playing for runner up. You're not playing for a conference finals. You're playing for a championship. The pieces are there. The players are good enough. You know what you have. You've taken an offseason to address the weaknesses, and you've got the chamber locked and loaded with young talent to develop over the years as they continue to progress. It's like, yeah, you're playing for a title. You're on the same level with the Timberwolves. You're on the same level with the Celtics. You're on the same level with the Mavericks. You're on the same level with the Nuggets, depending on how you kind of view them as a contender. And different discussion. We don't need to get super into that, but like, I don't want to say it's championship or bust, but they are at the point now where the goal is a championship. It is not wait and see. It is not let's see how this year goes. It's we're going all in and we better freaking win.
I got to co-sign that because I think the biggest move that tells you that's fact is the fact that they didn't wait another season on Josh Giddey. They traded him. They got older players back, and these are veteran players to fit the holes that we kept saying that they had. I think by them specifically doing that and also not trading any draft capital, also the way that they structured their contracts to make sure that in the future they can pay their young guys, they're focused on, okay, everything's shored up, everyone's paid, we are all under one accord, go after the title. We finished top 5 in offense and defense. You had a video a couple months ago where you talked about like the last 20 teams, like 16 of them were actually top 5 in both. Their goal is to be back in that crop again, except this time actually realize their goal and make it to the finals. And I don't really have a problem with those expectations because this is a team that was the number 1 seed last year. All the key players are coming back and you have better players coming in. I think that should be the expectation. I think that this team could probably go back to back in terms of being the number 1 seed. And this could be a Shea MVP season. Right? Like he just had a crazy season last year. Are we that surprised if Shea is once again in those conversations? Not at all.
I think MVP is unattainable. Obviously, I'm in the group of people who's like anytime a player says that they're not worried about the MVP, they're lying. Every player would like to win an MVP.
Yeah.
I understand they'll give the PR answer where they're like, I'm only focused on a championship. And that's good. That's a good answer. That's good PR. I understand. But I'm sure Shea would love to get an MVP. I would love it if Shea did get an MVP. And I think what's good is that I know Shea can win an MVP without sacrificing the team's performance to win an MVP. The team will be good if he wins MVP. The team will not be good in spite of him winning MVP. Nothing has to be sacrificed. The team's success is because he is capable of playing at an MVP caliber level.
Yeah. And I kind of find this funny because I think what's going to happen is Shea's offensive numbers might go down a little bit to make room for Chet and also J-Dub. But ironically, this will be the year he gets the MVP because he'll probably win more games. Like, I do think that this is a 60-plus win team. I do believe that.
I think 60 wins is totally doable.
Yes. I think the health absolutely matters in this for sure. But I think last year the reason why he didn't win it is because Jokic, which again, Jokic's one of the craziest players in the modern era, where he just plays every damn game and is giving you like a 30-point triple-double on 60-plus true shooting, right? But talking about Denver slightly, I mean, I think the team kind of got worse in terms of the guys that they know they can rely on, and they're kind of going into uncharted territory with their young players in the development, and then seeing how Russ can lead their overall second unit. I still think they'll be good, but I think like top 2, top 3 team, I'm not sure if I'm there with the Nuggets this season.
Yeah, I think Jokic is good enough to get you a playoff spot, like
100%,
especially when Jamal Murray's healthy, Michael Porter Jr. is healthy, Aaron Gordon's healthy. Those 4, that's enough to get you a playoff spot. I really don't have any doubt in that. But I think their ceiling currently is definitely a little capped due to that supporting cast, assuming that there isn't a significant level of internal development. Obviously, right. we talked about it with OKC, like they need a lot of things to go right, or they needed a lot of things to go right for themselves this past year. I think Denver, you can have a similar conversation of like they need a lot of things to go right to still remain in that upper tier of contender where it's like, okay, this team, if the chips fall right, they can win a championship. Right. I think we're kind of getting to the point now where it's like you need your young players to really step it up. And you need everyone to be healthy for a full season to really be able to still remain in that kind of top tier.
I agree. So then for you, who's your top 4 teams in the West if you had to basically power rank it?
In the West? OKC, Timberwolves, Mavericks. See, this is where it gets weird because you've got the Grizzlies coming back.
You spoiled it. I was gonna shock you by saying Grizzlies. Yeah,
I'm probably gonna say Grizzlies. I think the Grizzlies are gonna be really good.
Yeah, same. I have a podcast with some very dope Memphis guys soon, and I'm high on Memphis a lot. Mainly because the one year where I'm like, I'm not sure how good the Grizzlies were gonna be, and then they were the 2 seed, and how I watched the games and seeing what Ja, Bane, and also JJJ could do on the floor at the same time with their defense. I just feel like that pace and their style of play with GG Jackson and also Vincent Williams, I just think that team is prepared to go back on that type of run. I think for me, I have OKC, I have Minnesota, I have the Grizzlies, and I probably have the Mavericks as my top 4 teams. Is there
I feel like we're forgetting somebody, but
I feel like we're forgetting someone in the West. I can't think right now.
The Clippers got worse.
See, this is interesting. Right? Because I talked with I talked with my boy Dime, right? He is the host for, I believe, Locked On Clippers, right? And he talked to me about it. And I got to be honest, the Clippers got worse, yes, in terms of Paul George. So their floor is questionable, but I think with the amount of wings they got back, they're banking on, okay, top 10 defense, James Harden and Kawhi led offense. We can still be in that inner circle. Got to see it, but I can still see them being good, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm more just worried about the health than anything, but like Kawhi had, for all intents and purposes, relative to what we expect from Kawhi, like he had a pretty healthy season. James Harden can still do it with the best of them. I think James Harden is still a fantastic player. As Paul George, really, like, we saw some of the reactions to Paul George signing with the 76ers. It's like, Paul George is still a great player. Don't get me wrong. Don't mistake that I'm like saying he's trash, but like, I think the Clippers did enough to still remain competitive in the West. It's
Agreed.
just, are they still in that top 4 kind of realm?
Yeah. I gotta say this though. My favorite team in the West has to be the Timberwolves. I've never told you this before, but I am one of the biggest supporters for, last but not least, the Rudy Gobert fan club. I'm sorry. I just ride hard for my guy. I feel like a lot of times they rag on him a whole lot because of things he can or can't do. I think that the season that they had with Cat going down for the rest of the season, and they were still a very good team. The DPOY level season Gobert had this year with Ant making leaps in his game as well. I just think that next year they're going to be in year 3 of playing together, and that continuity edge over everyone else is going to make them a very good team. I think they might be the 1 or 2 seed this year, mainly because last year it was literally a 3-way tie, and that's with Cat being hurt. You know?
Yeah. And listen, it's funny. I tell this story every now and then. So, you know, if you've listened to me on other podcasts before, then you've probably heard this story. But in March of 2020, I went to Oklahoma City to see the Thunder play the Utah Jazz on March 19th, I believe it was. And that was the game when Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID. And the
Yes.
frame right there, I have the tickets in the program from the game framed. So if anyone has a reason to hate Rudy Gobert, it's me, because he ruined me seeing my first, not just my first Thunder game ever, but my first in-person NBA game ever.
Yeah.
And listen, if I don't hate Rudy Gobert and if I don't think Rudy Gobert sucks, then I don't know how other people do, because this guy ruined like a very important moment for me in my life because he decided to just start feeling up some microphones.
Yeah, he was wilding. He did not make things easier on him at all. But it's like, this Wolves team to me is such a good team, mainly because of their defensive principles. But the fact that in the Denver series, Cat could shade up on Jokic, and then Gobert could basically play help and kind of take away the paint from Gordon, who every time the dunker pass was killing the Lakers routinely, right? For them to be able to do that, and they're only in year 2 of playing together, is great. I kept saying throughout the entire playoffs to Minnesota, please, you should run more offense with Cat and Gobert as your 2-man game with Ant 1 pass away. They were having so much success with that set repeatedly. And I feel like next season, the growth in what they want to do offensively can really show, right? Plus, people said that the Suns were like a bad matchup for them, and they dominated the Suns based off how good they were defensively. They literally said, Gobert, we're going to let you help on Kevin Durant. We're not going to overreact because we trust our defenders. They're like a very potent defensive team.
Yeah, I think they have such a good understanding, and like you said, their principles is really where you see a lot of their success, and they're just so disciplined. And I think we saw like the culmination in that Denver series of like, when a team has the scout down like so specifically, and they have such like a robust game plan where they just know exactly what they're going to do for XYZ, like that team is just so good defensively. And I don't even think we've seen the best of them, what they can be as an offense. Anthony Edwards is going to continue to grow as an offensive player. And I think there are other pieces on that roster that are going to continue to making.
Rob Dillingham? They got Rob Dillingham as their bench guy now? Like, oh.
Mm-hmm. And then his name is escaping me, but they drafted Terrence Shannon. Terrence Shannon Jr.
Yeah,
I'm so excited for him. He's going to be good.
He's going to be good.
He's just a really solid player, and I'm excited.
And then the growth.
They're my second favorite team.
And then the growth of one of my favorite players in the league, Jaden McDaniels. Seeing him and Ant just love the defensive stuff. Seeing them go through another season where they can really figure that out. It'll be fun to watch. Absolutely. Those are my two favorite teams, I would say. It would be Minnesota and then OKC in the Western Conference. I think those are the teams that are young, but also very potent defensively. I think the offense is what people want to see grow the most from that Wolves team.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll say this then. Okay. West and East, what are the teams that you think can really win a title? Not like be in the mix in the playoffs, but like serious championship hopes of those teams. Is it 3 teams? Is it 4? Who are your picks for that? I'm just curious.
OKC. This is not in order. These are just a list of things. OKC, Timberwolves, Celtics, the Knicks.
Oh, okay.
I love the Knicks. I'm really high on the Knicks.
Okay.
I'm not going to say the Sixers just yet. I need to see how things go. And then
Fair.
The Mavericks.
5. Okay.
I would say 5 teams where I'm like, if they won it next year, I would be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. They're good enough to win a championship.
You can let me know if I'm hating on the Knicks. I struggle with how good I think they're going to be because I think their back court in terms of their second unit, now that they have OG and Mikal, which by the way is crazy to have OG and Mikal on the same team, but to now push Josh Hart and Dante to the bench, that makes them one of the deepest teams in the league. They might have the best bench unit in the whole league. But my question is, their other creator on ball outside of Brunson is Randall. To me, this is a huge prove year for Randall. I got to see with Randall because I think he's been a pretty disappointing playoff player. I think a lot of his reads just simply aren't there when it matters next to Brunson. This is the best roster to see if you can make it work with guys who shoot good volume from 3, but he would have to prove it for me to really put him in that conversation. I think they'll be very good. I'm just not sure if they're like a title team.
That's totally fair. I think, Julius Randle is like the biggest in probably like, there's other question marks, but Julius Randle is for sure the biggest one there. And I do like the flexibility of like the Knicks potential. I'm not saying they need to trade Randle. Some Knicks fans get very defensive about that. I'm not saying they need to trade Julius Randle. I'm saying they can trade Julius Randle. If they get to the point where like, all right, this isn't working, let's trade him. They could theoretically explore some options. And I think that makes them really interesting of like having that flexibility where you get to January and you're like, this isn't working. Let's try something new. And then all of a sudden you end up like the Mavericks where it's like, hey, this wasn't working.
And that was the piece we needed to get to the finals.
Let's get Daniel Gafford. All of a sudden, bing, bang, boom, you're in the finals. So that's what I like about the Knicks heading into this year.
Do you think the Bucks are done? Because I think they're a team that a lot of people don't talk about as much. I think the injury stuff with Giannis in the playoffs is starting to pile up now over these last 2 seasons. Dame didn't look like the player people thought he would be, but I think a lot of that is because he was traded to a team that he frankly didn't want to go to, and he couldn't work out the same way because he was going to get traded. I think this year Dame is going to have a strong revenge season, but also Doc Rivers is the head coach, and I got to be honest, I don't really trust him as a adjustment playoff guy. Are the Bucks done to you, Alex?
We've been talking about question marks for a lot of this episode, and like the Bucks are the poster child of question marks. It's like, is this going to go right? Is Doc Rivers going to like learn how to be a high quality coach? Are all these young players going to work out? Is AJ Johnson going to be something? Is Marjon Beauchamp going to be something? Are all these different guys that they have on their roster that they're just really big question marks right now? It's like they need a lot of guys. Is Chris Middleton going to be healthy? Et cetera, et cetera. There's just so many different things where it could happen, but I'm not gonna put money on it. Okay, word. Well, I just wanted a quick like NBA synopsis from you as a creator. I think having these, conversations are cool. But I want to say, Alex, great podcast. We went well over an hour. I don't regret any of it. Great conversation. If you guys made it this far to the end of the video, shout out to you. I'll have timestamps all throughout the video. I had to religiously use this towel because it's very hot in here. But shout out to Alex for coming on to the Gifted Hoops podcast. Did you enjoy your time? I had a blast, man. This was a great conversation. Thank you again for having me. It was a great time.
Dope. Well, make sure to tap into Alex Hoops. Again, his link will be in the description box when this drops. You can catch this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at the Gifted Hoops podcast. And Alex, I want to say I appreciate you coming on because every offseason what I do is, since there's no basketball in terms of the NBA, I go through all 30 teams so I can have the best understanding of what the league from year to year shifts and looks like. So this is me continuing that process and having you on to talk hoops. You know ball, and you work hard as hell. I have a insane amount of respect for that. So thanks for being on this pod, man.
Thanks for having me. Had a blast. I love talking hoops. So any chance I get, I'm always like, let's do it.
Dope. Well, people, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a good one. Remember, watch basketball before you talk about it. Peace.